Good evening, listeners, brave navigators of the enigmatic and the concealed. Have you ever felt the pull of the unanswered, the allure of the mysteries that shroud our existence? For more than a decade, a unique comic publisher has dared to dive into these mysteries, unafraid of the secrets they might uncover. This audacious entity is Paranoid American. Welcome to the mystifying universe of the Paranoid American podcast.
Launched in the year 2012, Paranoid American has been on a mission to decipher the encrypted secrets of our world. From the unnerving enigma of MK Ultra mind control to the clandestine assemblies of secret societies. From the awe-inspiring frontiers of forbidden technology to the arcane patterns of occult symbols in our very own pop culture. They have committed to unveiling the concealed realities that lie just beneath the surface. Join us as we navigate these intricate landscapes, decoding the hidden scripts of our society and challenging the accepted perceptions of reality.
Folks, I've got a big problem on my hands. There's a company called Paranoid American making all these funny memes and comics. Now, I'm a fair guy. I believe in free speech as long as it doesn't cross the line. And if these AI-generated memes dare to make fun of me, they're crossing the line.
This is your expedition into the realm of the extraordinary, the secret, the shrouded. Come with us as we sift through the world's grand mysteries, question the standardized narratives, and brave the cryptic labyrinth of the concealed truth. So strap yourselves in, broaden your horizons, and steel yourselves for a voyage into the enigmatic heart of the Paranoid American podcast, where each story, every image, every revelation brings us one step closer to the elusive truth.
I'm talking to Ike Baker, who's the author of Formless Fire. He's also written something on Cornelius Agrippa, and he's also got something it's like an on-location field immersion through Egypt that's going to be in October of this year, where he's got 16 people, and they're going to get like one-on-one. Anyways, I'll let Ike describe what he's got going on, and also welcome to the show, Ike, man. Thank you so much for taking some time out and talking to me about Freemasonry and esotericism and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned the book and all that stuff. I really appreciate it. Yeah, the book is A Formless Fire, Rediscovering the Magical Traditions of the West. Came out last year, 2024 in September. It was released on Tria Prima Press. That's a small Masonic publisher.
And you've also got a couple like articles that I saw, like the Agrippa one was like another ebook or like another book that you had put out. And then you also had an article called, it's basically on Zosimos of Panopolis, which is like one of the OG alchemists that was in the esoteric Mason magazine. So it seems that you have definitely like some leanings toward occultism, esoterica, and Masonry all combined. Is there any other like extra label that you think would fit well for the type of work that you're interested in?
I would say it's esotericism, Western esotericism, particularly the practice of it, not just the history and the theory. I consider myself an independent scholar. I co-organized and took part in, an awesome, incredible, really, because it was on site in Egypt in last October, this symposium. And it's called the Hermopolis Symposium, and it was at Dr. Mervat Abdel Nasser's new Hermopolis village in Minya, Egypt. And we basically sequestered some of the best and brightest scholars in religion, philosophy, and esotericism, along with some of the most well-known and well-practiced practitioners. So we had Professor Walter Hanegraaff, Professor Charles Stang from the, Professor Hanegraaff is, he's a professor of the history of Hermetic philosophy and related currents at the University of Amsterdam. Professor Charles Stang is the head of the Harvard Center for the Study of World Religions. Professor of Religious Studies Shannon Grimes, Dr. Greg Shaw, who's an incredible light in the fields of, the study Neoplatonic theurgy. I mean, it was star-studded. And we had Jamie Paul Lamb, the renowned Masonic author and astrologer, P.D. Newman, Soledad Davies, Carl Hayden Smith. We had a host of really, really excellent people. Also, last year lectured at Oxford University for the Eurotus conference put on by the Aleph Trust. So I do consider myself in that scholarly world, but I have to, I encourage the practice of this stuff, and the thing is that I wanted to do with my channel, right? Arcanum. I have a YouTube channel, and that's how I really got started out in the visible world. The internet and things like that, is by producing these documentary style presentations on the history, theory, and practice of Western esotericism. But I also, I do the podcast thing. I've probably got like 50 or 60 podcast episodes with authorities in the field, from practitioners to authors and things like that. But that's my bag, is to teach people how to practice this stuff and make them, I like to say belief is not a 4-letter word with me. I don't want anybody to feel silly, or I try not to make any sarcastic kind of, I leave the wry sarcasm out of my content, at least in terms of, poo-pooing people for believing this stuff. I think that's really, really important. I want people to feel comfortable. I mean, I'm an initiate of Freemasonry. I'm an initiate of Martinism. And for, my longest trajectory and initiation, believe it or not, is with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. I'm a senior adept in that system, and I'm a temple chief. So,
right, not everyone in my audience is happy with this, but yeah, I was also raised in 2007 as a Master Mason, and then I think like a year and a half later, I got to the 32nd in Scottish Rite, and that was sort of as far as I've dabbled into like official esotericism in like the Western way, but when we say Western esotericism, it's a huge umbrella, right? So this kind of includes like Freemasons and Rosicrucians and Martinists and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and even in some of your other episodes where you're talking about like the origins of alchemy in the West, you've got like the Valentinians and the Basilians and all these other sort of people, and like Neoplatonists, or all kind of these different camps. Which of them is the best?
I don't know, man. That's really hard to say. I think, right, because it's a value judgment, and I'm not opposed to making value judgments, but I would say, that's kind of like asking, which kind of food is the best. It's like, well, it's going to vary. Really, I think that each of these is suited to different types of people, and I think that that's really important that we recognize that at the outset.
I almost see. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Complete your thought.
No. Sorry, please.
I guess in a very, very simplistic and maybe ignorant way, but I see some of these different organizations, they self-influence each other, right? They don't live in vacuums, so they all affect each other, and they all kind of deal with like these feedback loops. But there also seems to be almost like a linear progress where some are built more on top of the previous ones. Like, so for example, Martinism, what would be the pitch for like a modern day 21st century Freemason, which is already maybe an antiquated sort of worldview, but what would be the pitch to like look into Martinism in particular?
Again, it's going to be completely dependent upon I wouldn't pitch it to certain people, right? I wouldn't pitch it to all Masons. And I think that you understand this, being a brother of the fraternity. Not a lot of Masons are interested in the esoteric. It's like, I like to say that Masonry is to esotericism what a 100-watt light bulb is to the sun. So, it's very, very dim light when it comes to esotericism. And it doesn't have to be. I think it could be something else. But esoteric, people who are interested in esotericism, they broadly fall into two camps: contemplative and operative. So that is people who think that esotericism is mysticism. And there's an argument for that, a contemplative sort of thing. And then people who think that esotericism is ritual and magic. and what we call theurgy, the higher traditions of magic. That is much more, I think, esotericism in terms of the Western esoteric traditions of the West. So the Western esoteric traditions that, the groups are included in that, but really what defines them is their practices. So the traditions themselves are astrology, alchemy, divination, ceremonial magic. That's, I mean, most of the Western esoteric. And now Rosicrucians, Freemasons, the Golden Dawn, they're all included in that bracket because they base themselves on the earlier philosophies that those things came out of, like Neoplatonism, Hermeticism. So it really depends on the type of Mason and the type of esoteric Mason. So Martinism is something that I would recommend or pitch to somebody who is interested in a much more contemplative sort of expression of or approach to the divine, approach to spirituality. It came out of a theurgic tradition, right? The Elecoans, which was wild. It was one of the coolest, most interesting anomalies in Western history in terms of occultism. This group of like lay exorcists who banded together to sort of try and exorcise the earth of all its evil and stuff like that. It was really, and they had no affiliation with the church other than being, Catholics that attended church and attended mass and things like that. So Martinism came out of that because a man named Louis Claude de Saint Martin was a student of the founder of the Elecoans, who was Martine de Pasquale. So he basically was like, why do we have to do all this crazy ritual stuff and conjure up and evoke demons just to tell them to get out of here? It's like, hey, come here. Leave, like that kind of thing. He was just more interested in what he called the way of the heart. And so Martinism, it has its ritual forms that were later developed by two men, Gerard Encausse, better known as Papou or Papus, and Augustin Chabousseau in France in the 1880s, 1800s, late 1800s. They kind of made an esoteric order out of it based on, everything. All of this stuff is based on Freemasonic ritual, and almost all of it studies in some way, shape, or form Masonic symbolism. It's just that they interpret it differently, more esoterically. And so, rather than doing this theurgic kind of ritual and having the Solomonic circles and pentacles and triangles of art, you just have a very contemplative, prayerful, humble sort of practice of quietude and introspection and prayer. So that is for somebody that's more interested in that kind of esotericism. I would approach that like that. I would pitch it like that, whereas if somebody were interested in magic and spiritual development, a la initiation, rich, like sort of like a spiritual alchemy, hands down, that's the Golden Dawn. There's no better system than that for that.
I like that you brought up the contemplative versus operative. And I wonder, in your opinion, is there a good analogy there for the difference in, say, like certain types of alchemy where there's belief that it's purely a spiritual, purification, that you're just working on like your inner self, versus a rubber hits the ground version of alchemy where they're actually transmuting base metals into gold, and sometimes there's an asterisk that's like you have to have worked on your inner in order to be able to affect the outer. But is that like a decent analogy between speculative or contemplating versus operating within Masonry?
There is an analogy there, but I will say something like the Golden Dawn, which is inherently more active, a magical path, an esoteric path, as compared to Martinism or even Freemasonry, that is predicated, the outer order, right? The actual Golden Dawn is predicated on a spiritual alchemy. So even though it's the active path, it's using the almost speculative kind of alchemy. But I'll put it this way. Zosimus, right? We mentioned him before. He's, like you said, kind of OG alchemist. An Egyptian scribe priest in charge of metallurgy, meaning the dyeing of metals for religious statuary in Roman Egypt. This was about the third and fourth century, or third or fourth century at CE, Common Era, and basically he tells us that in their workings with nature, and I'm paraphrasing here, but in their workings with nature, they discovered this sort of pattern or formula, this principle or series of principles that allowed nature to transmute itself by the assistance of a qualified operator, right? So he basically says this in his letters to his female student Theosebia, who was most likely an early Christian. And he basically tells her the fact that nature has this principle means that we also are predicated on these principles, meaning that this transmutation can apply to the body. This transmutation can apply to the soul. This transmutation can apply to the spirit of a person. So we have, a lot of people will debate, especially lab alchemists. They're like, and I love lab alchemists. I study with them. I do lab alchemy, but they're just very like, no, it's science, and it's, we got, and it's, and then you have people in the Golden Dawn and magic for centuries now, up until only very recently, saying no, it's a spiritual analogy. They were never really doing well. We see that Zosimus at this early stage is telling us it's both. So there is definitely what I would say is there's an overarching bracket that there's a little. It's kind of like the yin and the yang, right? You have the two sort of opposing elements. But there's admixture, there's intermixture, there's a little bit of the other one in each. And that's really, really important. And I would say that about alchemy. I'd say that about magic. The practice of esotericism in general. Yeah, that active, that passive. But also, like you're saying, the lab alchemist, in order to be able to do any real work, has to have done some sort of contemplative practice to change themselves and taken a little bit of a passive introspection and work on themselves. Now, similarly, in what we conceive of as initiatic or high magic theurgy, coming from the Neoplatonic, the Greek theoria, divine action or God working, you've got people who separate those into two camps, right? You've got theurgy, which is the use of ritual and materials like stones and incenses and herbs and things like, and words, all put together in this beautiful symphony of symbol in a ritual in order to elevate the soul. And then there's another camp, right? That the theurgy was really its popularizer and the main guy that we look at on the historical record as its promulgator, its greatest hype man, really, is a philosopher named Iamblichus of Chalkis, and he was also active in the third and the fourth centuries. And you have in the other camp the quote unquote father of Neoplatonism, Plotinus, who was also a Platonic philosopher, but his approach was more contemplative, and they call that theoria, divine contemplation. Well, it's silly to think that if you're doing theurgy, you're not doing a little bit of theoria. If you're doing magic, you're not doing a little bit of contemplative sort of stuff. In the modern day, I mean, one of the strongest practices, the best practices for a Golden Dawn magician is still meditation.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but in one of the previous interviews that I heard you mentioned being raised Roman Catholic. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So how much, I'm curious, because ironically, Roman Catholicism as a cult, as it kind of is, it kind of preps you for occultism in a lot of ways, but it seems to, basically preclude you from becoming a Freemason, at least a one-way road, right? Like Freemasons will accept Catholics, but Catholics on paper are not supposed to become Freemasons. Do you think that that's outdated, or you think that there's like a relevant reason for that to still be the case, like on the books right now in 2025?
I mean, the thing that a lot of people have wrong is that you don't get excommunicated if you're found out for being a Freemason in the Catholic Church. They don't do that. But you're considered sort of outside of the bounds, and they'd rather you not. But I'll say this, man. I mean, it's like, far be it from me to be the judge or the arbiter about what the institution of Catholic Christianity should or shouldn't do. I think they have bigger fish to fry. They have other problems that they should be worrying about. But essentially, it all boils down to certain things, right? Their institutionalized religion cannot really guide us to a private, interior, prayerful state, because it's so hyper fixated on all these social rules, and do's and don'ts. And the thing is that you have to, as a practitioner, as somebody that maybe is a practitioner or of a religion, or somebody who's a practitioner of a particular philosophy, you have to come to those decisions yourself. You have to do that because you want to, not because someone tells you to, or not because you feel bad or you feel guilty or you feel like, you're going to be in trouble with Big Daddy. Because, I mean, even Christ says it. Your Father in heaven sees the contents of your heart. He looketh at the heart, and so that is, that's basically my thing. I don't feel any guilt for, I still consider myself a Catholic. I was baptized, communed and confirmed a Catholic, and I have not disavowed that. I disagree very much so with the institution of Catholicism on many issues. But ultimately, it's an institution, like all institutions, like Freemasonry as an institution. Anything people make, and everything's made by people, will be indelibly imbued with our highest potentials and our lowest potentials. So this whole kind of utopian thing to me is staying, this idea of the way things could be or should be better. Not to say we shouldn't try, but this whole kind of trap of blaming institutions instead of fixing ourselves, working on ourselves, it's just more of the same. This kind of, it's predicated on this illusion, this dualism, that really just is self-defeatist. I'm not big enough to, I'm like, these institutions are in control of my life. There's a deterministic component to everything. Your hormones are in control of a lot of you. Your genetic upbringing, your genetic makeup, your upbringing, your astrological sort of schema of character and things like all that stuff. The true magician transcends fate, and he does that by, that's a solo journey. That's between you and God. It's the most intimate relationship you'll ever have. So I'm not really interested in outsourcing my spiritual journey to an institution, at least one that's not as big as the Catholic Church. I mean, and I don't outsource anything I do to something like even the Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn is a set of teachings. The Golden Dawn is a set of rituals, really. That's what it is. And it's said by the founders in some of the foundational documents of the Inner Order. They're called the Flying Rolls, that the highest authority we have is the rituals themselves. And the rest is for the working out in our own spheres, in the privacy of our own mind and thoughts and hearts, working this stuff out.
You mentioned God a couple times in that, and it makes me wonder, what are truly incompatible belief systems when it comes to not just Masonry, but maybe just like occultism in general, all the different denominations we talk to. One of them that comes up is atheism. That atheism is incompatible, that you have to at least admit that there's some sort of higher, it's almost like AA or something. Like you have to admit that there's something higher than you in order for anything else to work. Do you agree with, first of all, do you agree with that? Do you agree that atheism is incompatible with occultism and magic and Masonry and everything that you can put under the umbrella? And then likewise, is there anything else outside of atheism that's also like incompatible?
I think atheism is anti-human. I think it's anti-humanist. And I think a lot of the postmodern agenda and the stuff that we're seeing today foisted upon us as a society is inherently anti-human. So I think atheism is incompatible with being a human. And I think that the fact that there's so many atheists out there is one of the reasons why, as a society, we're suffering. We are laboring under a mass psychosis. So yes, I think it's incompatible with Masonry. I think it's incompatible with certainly any kind of spiritual development, because what are you relegating this to? Psychology? You know, it's not going to work. When people inherently self-deify, you have no higher authority. You have no paradigm. You have no archetype. You have no paragon. You know, there's nothing to work towards. There's nothing to contrast the petty self against. And, you know, there's a lot in secular humanism that says for the good of the people. Where do you think that morality came from? Where do you think the idea of social justice came from, if not from religion? From Buddhism, but primarily in the West, Christianity. You know, and so it's absolutely incompatible, because the thing is, it is based on a set of a priori assumptions that essentially says, if what I want, right, spiritual reality, if that's to my right, it's based on a set of ideas, theories, and philosophies that say you can't turn right. What do you mean you can't turn right? Yeah, you can't turn right. So, but that's where I want to go. Well, you can't go there, so you don't turn right. It's self-defeatist. You're never going to really, I mean, I can't say never. And I'll tell you why. Because God can do whatever God wants, you know. You could be gifted with a breakthrough experience or a breakdown experience, and that is grace from your creator that may change your mind. And right, we call that metanoia in the Greek tradition. And that's the beginning of initiation, really. So everything that we do in a Freemasonic lodge or a Golden Dawn temple is, or even a Martinist chapter, it's a catalyst. The real initiation happens, it's an interior thing, and it's between you and God.
I'm wondering, these are just purely hypotheticals and maybe even some dumb questions mixed in with all these, just for good measure. But if you were an atheist and you got, you know, you got raised, you went through all 3 degrees, and just going through the ritual and the memorization, just everything involved with it, would an atheist have something to gain at the end of this? Like, and let me ask it in a slightly different way here too, that if there's objective truth in any of the tenets of Masonry about like making good men better and all of this, would some of that not just happen to you regardless if you personally were an atheist during that entire sequence or not? Like, wouldn't at a certain point, if any of it had a objective value and truth on you and like your little microcosm, that it would just be self-evident regardless of deism or atheist or any other denomination?
Well, Freemasonry's tenets of making good men better is predicated on the idea that they believe in God, right? I mean, that's basically like saying I want to make tomato soup and not use tomatoes. You know, it's part of the recipe. It's part of the recipe. But I will say this: what we're speaking of now is essentially a way of creating a window for a shadow of doubt, which I understand. It's semantics. This is pure Platonism that we're doing back and forth here. And it's using hypotheticals. But the truth of the matter is that I can't speak to whether or not I was an atheist if I went through Masonry, that it would make me any better, because I'll tell you what I can speak to myself. I can't speak generically, but I leaned towards atheism, nihilism, and solipsism for a very long time. And the things that I participated in always had a slant of selfishness and what can I gain? Always. And I used the mask, the guise of egalitarianism, because as an atheist, a nihilist, solipsist, I can't even prove you exist in any way, shape, or form.
Here's the brain in a vat, and I'm here for your amusement.
In my head, what is the highest good? The highest good is me. That's what we mean by self-deification. And you know what that is? That's Satanism, practically. I don't care about the tenets of LaVeyan Satanism or theistic. For all intents and purposes, to deify the self and constantly be self-seeking, constantly, what can I derive from this? Constantly, what can I extract from this? That is Satanism by practical definition. And so when I leaned towards that way, in my heart of hearts, I feel like I never stopped believing because to me that is the ultimate truth, and I think every person in their heart of hearts knows it. I think they make up these pseudo sophisticated perspectives because society makes them feel like fools for thinking of it. You don't get taught that you're taught that there's only one type of truth, and it's scientific, and it's imperial, and it's empirical, and it's positivistic. But when you begin to, like I say, turn your head right, you see that, oh, there are other kinds of truth in this world, and I don't need to define them in the same way that I could define the weight in grams of a cookie. They have their own domains of authority because they have their own modes and methods of human perception, their own little niche corner as a power of the soul. And so I will tell you 110%, one of the reasons I rail against atheism is because there are no rules. You make your own rules. And so I can't speak to what any given atheist, what set of rules they're going to adhere to. But when I leaned towards that way, it was all about me. And I used a very nice facade, a very well-sounding facade, because at that point too, when you get there and the quote unquote left brain is so hyper developed, and the right brain, the intuitive, let's say psychic, or so the prayerful, the religious part of the self is so shriveled and atrophied. I mean, you glorify intellect. And I will tell you one thing right now, like the intellect is in and of itself hubris. It's hubristic. It thinks that it can do and solve everything, and that it can do it without any higher power. And so that is when we do that, it's like cutting our right arm and right leg off. You're half a person at that point.
This may be tangential to the atheism and the role of if we stick on Masonry, just so we have a very specific acute example here. And I don't want to make any assumptions as to whether atheism is even related to this concept. And this might sound incredibly hypothetical, but I feel like in our lifetimes, this could be played out. But could the same way that Masonry can make good men better, and that sort of tenet, do you think that could be applicable to, say, like AI or some sort of solid state intelligence? Is there a role of Masonry or ceremonial magic or any of these sort of, ceremonial processes, do you think could have any effect, any objective outcome on solid state intelligence of any kind?
I mean, I don't know. The whole question here, and when you're dealing in these kinds of conversation is even with Masonry, what does it mean to make somebody better? What system, what ruler are we using? What metric are we really using to gauge making good men better? I on a mundane level, casual level, I like the saying, yeah, Masonry makes good men better, but it's not always truth.
The definition basically from your last response, and I want to put words in your mouth, but it almost sounds like a level of altruism. Once you introduce altruism into a system, which kind of becomes counter to that satanic deist perspective, where you're not just a brain in a vat. Now, even if you are a brain in a vat, you want other brains in the other vats, maybe that are in your sphere, to also benefit in some way that might not be directly related to your self-preservation.
Yeah, I think that since the exoterification of Masonry during the First and Second World Wars and right after, I think that altruism is its highest goal, but I don't think that's the only goal. I think it's the first breakthrough you need to have in order to benefit from it. And Masonry itself tells you that. But ultimately, I think, I agree with Robert Hewitt Brown, W.L. Wilmshurst, Manly Palmer Hall, Albert Pike. I agree with the great writers of Masonry that it's here to make us divine. It's here to divinize us, as all the great writers of Masonry have said. And you get this kind of thing, especially down here in the South. Well, that ain't the way my granddaddy did it. Well, what about 100 years before your granddaddy? All these amazing writers talking about how Masonry is a continuation of the mystery traditions that is no less than the divinization of the communion of the individual soul with its God, and in that work, the reception of light and the radiance of that light outward. And you don't know what that entails until that happens to you, right? You don't know that it's going to manifest as, Ike's at the bake sale or Ike's doing charity. You don't know. I think but that's an ideal that we strive for. So I don't necessarily think altruism, it's not like this kind of, poison and cure 1-to-1. There's other layers to specifically these esoteric traditions. Now, if you want to talk about AI and that kind of stuff, I mean, I am inherently cynical of that stuff. I think like anything else, it's still man-made. So probably to whatever extent good that we do with it, will probably, like everything else we've done in this world, will do an equal amount of bad, because that's the way that materiality works. And like, we're using materiality to somehow overcome its polarity. It doesn't make sense. That's asking for it to be day all the time, right? Jachin or Yakin and Boaz, the two pillars, you knock one down, everything falls over. Reality doesn't work that way. You know why Thomas More named the book Utopia? Because why? in Latin or Greek, it's that word means nowhere. Topos is place. Utopia means no place. It's not going to happen. So it's we can't. That's just what's going to just keep happening in this wash dry cycle of materiality. Now the goal, I think, is to not think that we have all the answers, but to seek upward and be led by the higher in terms of how we are to govern the world. Govern our worlds, our microcosms. And I think that truly as human beings, as personas, not necessarily the sum totality of our souls, but as that little outward facing projection that shoots itself in the foot over and over again, the persona is too small a cog and too large a machine to understand what an infinite mind thinks is good.
This is maybe a controversial question, only in very small circles, but like, what is your thoughts on co-masonry or regular masonry? Like, is it not worth pursuing? Are these like things that will ultimately be net negatives for you, or are these valid options for people?
No, I think I have friends in co-masonry. I think co-masonry is a great thing. I don't think that it should be completely absorbed into regular masonry, because then I think that, in order for masonry to be something, there has to be what we call landmarks, right? There has to be some sort of boundary, right? Not a popular sentiment nowadays, but something needs to retain some kind of shape. And most things, even if you look at like music, right? Like, some of my favorite bands are not defined by their style is defined by their limitations, right? Like, I love Adam Jones. He's one of my favorite guitar players from Tool, because he doesn't sound like, Joe Satriani, because he can't like do that whole, that crazy shred thing. Your boundaries define what you are. Your limitations define what you are. Otherwise, you have no limitations. You have no boundaries. You have no landmarks in masonry. Then it's nothing. What's the difference between that and the other social clubs? But I do think co-masonry is a wonderful thing, and I know many wonderful co-masons, and I would never exclude them from even a conversation about masonry and things of that matter. The only thing that I would keep secret are the things that I have, of my own free will and accord, in the presence of the Almighty God and my brethren, sworn that I wouldn't reveal. And for no other reason than that, I took an obligation, and I take those very seriously. But other than that, co-masonry is fantastic. I'm actually really glad that it has its own space.
That's interesting. That's not a common answer from every single person that you might ask, because there's also a level of gatekeeping within like official free and accepted Masons that co-masonry and sort of a regular masonry are almost fraudulent. Not my word, but that there's almost like a shadow cast upon it. Not that it's just a tangential, not just an alternative. It's not Diet Coke to the Coke, right? It's basically like a completely different brand that you're supposed to avoid.
I mean, I haven't done any co-Masonic rituals, and so I don't really know what's going on. So it might be like different, right? We like Masonry might be Coke, co-Masonry might be Sprite. I don't know. I haven't tasted that one, but I don't shun it or like I wouldn't make people feel like they're not a part of, the overarching Masonic tradition. These things do have to evolve. I think if Masonry, the thing is, it's a very fine line to remain what you are and not be so rigid that you become brittle. So I think that one of these ways is like, okay, regular Masonry should keep its landmarks, right? There's not many of them. There's like 3. But should our attitude towards co-Masonry be like this elitist kind of exceptionalist exclusionary policy? Absolutely not. That attitude in and of itself is a breach of the Masonic, ethos and tenets and things like that. So, and the thing is, like, Masonry has very little secrets, and they're the modes of recognition. They're the words, they're the signs, they're the tokens. Everything else is published. So it's like, what would I be violating in talking about with them? Nothing. They could go buy Duncan's ritual, or they could, pick up Wilmshurst's meaning of Masonry, or they could pick up, anything written by Manly Palmer Hall and basically put together what we're doing in the Craft Lodge.
Right. And that actually comes up pretty often, where the Masons are the secret society, and the usual tagline is it's actually a society with secrets, not a secret society, because they're all public. And that a strong argument is that if you really want to know, like, the quote unquote secrets, the things that, Masons aren't allowed to tell you, you can find them. They're like readily found. They've been published over and over in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. Like right now, you can probably go on TikTok or Twitter and find someone that's done like a secret cam and like recorded all 3 of the rituals. Like all of that is kind of out in the open. But it originated, if I have to just like throw a dart and make sure it actually hits somewhere on the board, you kind of have like the Jacksonian Democrats, where you've got Jackson becomes president, and this is probably like Masonry and politics kind of at its peak. And from this, you have a whole bunch of disillusioned non-Jacksonian Democrats that kind of splinter away, and this kind of dovetails into this anti-Masonic party, because at the tail end of Jacksonian democracy is this tale of William Morgan, right? And I got to ask,
Morgan affair.
Do you think William Morgan is even a real person? Because I've heard this theory that he was either a plant by anti-Masons, or even like a double twist where it was a plant by Masonry to then like do some sort of a sacrificial proxy ritual to be like, and that's why you don't tell on our secrets. But do you think he was a real person, period?
I don't really know. I mean, I labored under that assumption, in my basic understanding of the Morgan affair. But I don't think, I wouldn't completely rule it out that it was a plant. I mean, it's right around, American politics has been there's been so much theater, like almost from the very beginning. So it's like, it's hard for me, like America was so good at that for so long, kind of creating this Hegelian dialectic and also using, this kind of, I don't know if you want to call it false flag sort of situation, so I wouldn't necessarily put it past anybody, especially an anti-Mason party. But I don't know enough about the history, and I haven't dug deep enough into the details and the various theories of the Morgan affair to really have a conclusive opinion. Yeah. And I was
going to say, regardless of the truth behind the Morgan affair, if anyone listening is like, what the hell is the Morgan affair? Basically, a guy, I'll simplify it. A guy was like, I'm going to write a book on the Masons and spill all your secrets. And then allegedly a bunch of Masons were like, no, you're not. And then they basically take him out according to some of the oaths that he made, and made it in this big like symbolic practice. But this William Morgan affair, regardless of how it happened or how valid it happened, kind of gave rise to an anti-Masonic movement that then eventually, through a bunch of meandering lines that are not directly linear, but you get anti-Masonic Party, Whig Party, Republican Party, and you kind of actually have an entire political wing embodied by the origins of this like anti-Masonic, and now it's one of the main political parties now. And to shoehorn in sort of like a question on this, I just wonder that William Morgan affair seems like it was a milestone in the trajectory of Masonic membership as a whole. And you can almost see when the anti-Masonic Party comes to power, if you were to look at like a chart of all the Masonic memberships over time, like it just starts to sink, and then it almost hits a free fall around like, I don't know, 50s or 60s, to where if you were to look at a list of Masonic membership growth from the 80s until now, is just kind of like tapering off completely. I wonder, to be cliche, but it's like, do you think there's a correlation between the decline of modern society and the decline of Masonic membership, and maybe by proxy, just in general, occult membership and esotericism and thinking in this way?
Well, one last thing that I want to touch on about William Morgan is that he seems to have been in the history that is recorded of him. I included this. I did as much as I could in my episodes on the Arcanum channel about what is Freemasonry, and I discussed some of the controversies. P2 Lodge, the Bavarian Illuminati, the whole Luciferian thing. But the Morgan affair was a big one, and his history doesn't really speak well for himself. He seems like he was a little bit of a shisty guy, a little bit of a scammer, and somebody who defaulted on a lot of loans, maybe intentionally. Troubled guy. So I don't know how I would have handled that in that time period in a little lodge somewhere. And I don't know. I think it was upstate New York. But in terms of the decline of membership, I would say the decline of membership is related in an ancillary way or kind of an indirect way to the decline of civilization. And that is the decline of community and trust and responsibility within those communities. I find a lot of people are very, very skeptical of organizations. I find people are very, very skeptical of people who aren't skeptical of their whatever organization they belong to. And a lot of people ask me, is it a cult? And I just tell them everything's a cult. Everything's a cult. Look at the political parties in this country. Look at fandom. Look at everything's a cult at this point. It's like it's all this egregoric kind of has you by the nose hairs, sort of leading you around thing. And I think that something like Masonry is actually it can appear that way, right? I mean, we like to say that the secret word of a master Mason is no. Right, because none of us know how to say it, and none of us know how to say no to any of these groups and any of these functions and harmonies. But I would say that people, there's a tremendous amount of distrust in our fellow just human being, I think, and there's people don't want to organize into things that are stratified, and they don't want to organize into things where they have to take on too much responsibility. And, any of that human instinct to want to come together in community has now been redirected into activism. So, and the activism is predicated on breaking things down, not building things. So, I would say that Freemasonry, we're builders. And that is why the institution of Freemasonry has lasted this long. But as young men kind of are raised with this postmodernist, sort of highly skeptical, reductionist, factory installed settings, this perceptual software that we keep running, like a pair of contact lenses we're not aware we're wearing, that give everything this very gray tint. As more young men are tainted by this, I think that afflicted by it is a better word. They're afflicted by it. And it's the same thing with atheism too. I don't hate atheists. I don't want to exclude them, but I look at atheism the same way I do as postmodernism. It's a disease of the mind. To me, it's like, I don't for the same reason I wouldn't invite an atheist into Masonry, I wouldn't invite somebody with a terminal illness to come play soccer with me. It's that kind of, I don't hate them. Yeah, I wish them all the best and Godspeed. But it's kind of the same thing with this postmodernism and this rejection of wholesome community. And there's a skepticism. We look back on history and because our media that we consume is constantly telling us, look at Game of Thrones, look at Boardwalk Empire, look at all these tremendous shows and movies that we've consumed wholesale over the course of decades at this point. It's not that some of it wasn't true, but it's like they paint every period with the brush of our own times. And, they sort of very iconoclastically shatter the idea that anyone, anywhere, at any time had any sense of morality and dignity and virtue. And so that creates a very pessimistic outlook. And so I think that's how they're related. I think that because the reason why Masonic membership exploded is because of what we call joinerism, because it wasn't just Masonic membership. It was Elks. It was, whatever, Kiwanis. It was, all these different Knights of Columbus, all these things gathered together, particularly around the period of the interim period between the First and the Second World War, and then immediately post World War II in America, at least. It was all about community. And was there an underbelly component to that? Sure, absolutely. But, like I said earlier, equal amount of dark, equal amount of light. But I think that what they had going for them was that they were more in touch with immediate community. So it's like, I don't care that my neighbor doesn't believe the same things. I don't care that my neighbor, unless it's communism, but I don't care that my neighbor doesn't watch the same TV shows, smoke the same cigars, whatever, has a different car. He's still my neighbor, And so people could lean on each other in a more regional thing. Whereas the internet and globalism at large has made us go out and find people that are almost mirror images of ourselves. We shop for friends the way we do for shit on Amazon. It's like, because the market's open.
I really like that you brought up joinerism, because it reminds me of, this is an exoteric sort of description of the order out of chaos of the Scottish Rite, particularly Southern jurisdiction. That one of the things that made a mandate for this to even happen, for the Southern jurisdiction to even come together, was that there was a premise of almost door-to-door Mason salesman, where a guy would knock on your door and be like, look, we're going up to 7 degrees. If you show up at Friday and you bring $3, you're in, you'll get these degrees. And then the next day a guy would knock and be like, oh, they only go up to 7. We'll go up to 9 and we'll lower the price down to $250. And it almost became a traveling vacuum salesman economy of Masonry. And they realized, hey, wait, we're going to end up shooting ourselves in the foot here, which I believe gave rise to one of the rules of you're not supposed to solicit, to ask one, be one. And a lot of that is predicated on the fact that it became a door-to-door salesman technique for people that make money and sell degrees, for people that, because of that joinerist sort of mode of society that they were in at that point, when you would open your door to some random person knocking on it, hey, what have you got? Let's have a conversation, which doesn't really exist anymore. So I thought it's a unique dynamic to not be discounted. It's not like the country was more Masonic at that point. It was just that it was getting pushed more, and there was more of a reason to join groups that might have even been independent of Masonry. You mentioned the Elks would be a good example of that.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. The only way that you can go around pushing degrees on somebody is if there's an audience that wants them, right? In order to have a supply that doesn't completely fall flat, means there must be a demand. So I think that's, again, the spirit of community and it's still like that when you get involved in Masonry. They won't ask you to get involved in as a Mason, but once you get the 3rd degree, hey, we're doing a festival weekend, come get all the Yorkite degrees in 2 days, and you're sitting there with a group of 36 people, and each one of you gets a chance to go through and be the exemplar. And so, yeah, that's the thing, I can speak at least for the history of Mount Hermon Lodge in Asheville. there wasn't necessary. I'm the Masonic historian there. There wasn't so much the selling of degrees in our jurisdiction or our Masonic lodge. The Masons actually struggled for a really long period of time to even raise the funds to build the Scottish Rite Cathedral, which is like the main, now the Asheville Masonic Temple. And really it was, there were several different bonds. Some of it was business, some of it was veteranship and things like that. But we did actually in that period post World War II have a tremendous amount of people. But there were also things that were going on where it's like, they had demolay, for young boys. They had rainbow girls. They had all this stuff because it was, Masonic families were getting together and doing all this stuff. Now, the way that we suffered was that took the onus away from spiritual development and oriented it towards more community, mundane sort of oriented stuff. It became, demolay became kind of like, the Masonic Boy Scouts. Rainbow Girls became like the Masonic Girl Scouts. And it was all preparing everybody, right? The demolay would take his entered apprentice at 18 years old, and the Rainbow Girl might get involved with Amaranth or Eastern Star or something like that. And it was, a lot of it was, were these pathways to get them in early, because I'd be honest, I'd love it if everybody that petitioned my Golden Dawn Temple was either a Mason or a co-Mason, because if you follow what it tells you, to do, and render prayer unto the highest, right? No man should enter into any greater important undertaking without first invoking the blessings of deity, and conducting yourself uprightly in your several stations before man and God. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you do those things, like, you're just going to be a more well-adjusted, more balanced, and more capable human being. And I spend a lot of the time now, particularly trying to get people just to that state where we can even begin this process of initiation, So, I could see the virtue in bringing through Masonic, bringing your family and bringing people through the community through Masonry. But again, I will say, I had an extremely fortunate experience in Masonry. My lodge is, I live 2 hours from my lodge. I still go because the brothers there are, I would say, just exceptional human beings. Forget about Masonry. And there's such a spirit of community and open-mindedness, I'm standing in a lodge of maybe between 12 and 30 people delivering some sort of, presentation on an ancient Egyptian ritual. And, not everybody in there even gives a shit about any of that stuff, but they don't make you feel bad for it. It's not this kind of like overly dogmatic situation. And I know from other people that, in some lodges, each lodge has its own culture, and it's not always like that. So I do realize that my Masonic experience allows me to look at Masonry through a little bit, somewhat of a rose-colored filter.
This is a slight change of topic. I will absolutely be able to circle it back around to on topic, but when we're talking about Masonry, Golden Dawn, Rosicrucian, esotericism in general, do you think that psychedelics have any sort of an important role in this space, or is it its own thing?
That's a difficult question because I abhor their usage I think that, but at the same time I used them. I used psychedelics, I used psychotropics, DMT, LSD, all that stuff. And there was some sort of an initiatory event that happened, but I wouldn't say it was spiritual. I would say that it was intellectual, meaning
was that during your solipsistic phase or during your post?
Yeah, it was. It broke me out of the solipsistic phase. And it didn't necessarily bring me to faith, but it brought me to question my ideas about, solipsism and cynicism. And it enabled me to break the casing the mold that I was encased in, this kind of intellectual sort of and anxious trap. But the thing is, continued usage affected me in adverse ways, and I think that they are not an end in themselves, but potentially a means. Now, in something like you look at the Eleusinian mysteries. Sure, I can entertain the idea that there was ergot, some sort of hallucinogenic compound derived from the ergot on the fields they were drinking in the Kikaion. But
whatever was in Kaikion, whatever the hell that went into that.
But at the same time, like, it's not, not necessarily. That was an initiation that was open to the public. I don't think that, like, the highest level of Hierophant, of initiating priest, was just taking psychedelics, because in the Golden Dawn especially, you're taught how to you are taught and you experience the absolute reality that you can cultivate these states at will. It's just it's more difficult. It requires more discipline, and you can control it at that point. It's not, buy the ticket, take the ride. I'm on this for 4 hours. It's, and just completely open to potentially any sort of, psychic parasite, et cetera, that's around, or even just physical danger sometimes. But when you learn how to achieve these states, I would say that they're much closer to DMT states. When you learn to achieve these states at will, you can do it in a controlled fashion, and you can actually yield specific things from them. You can go in with a certain goal. That's actually a broader part of the Golden Dawn system. Things like scrying, things like path working, things like evocation. You're going in and you're trying to obtain information, knowledge, some kind of anything really of this nature, some kind of information or knowledge that cannot be obtained by other methods, and also to commune with higher order spirits. Some might call them angelic, what have you. To commune with higher order spirits is in some way divinizing. It is part of the ongoing regimen of purification of the soul.
One of I want to say that this was repeated in a book called Psychedelic Freemasonry, which was by another brother, Mason. But one of the claims was that the acacia was a representation of DMT, because DMT could potentially be derived from some versions of acacia. Do you think there's any merit to that at all, or is this just sort of John Allegro style, like Sacred Mushroom and the Cross?
Look, I think I know what you're talking about, right? The Psychedelic Secret of Freemasonry.
Right.
So that was my good friend P.D. Newman wrote that book. So, and this is a point where he and I kind of agree to disagree and shake hands amicably, because he's a wonderful man and an incredible scholar, and he knows far much more about this stuff than I do, because it's not my area of interest or specialization. And I'll say it again, kind of like in a similar way to what I said about the Eleusinian mysteries. Danny has compelling evidence for this stuff because of his understanding of plant compounds. He's a wild forager. He is somewhat of an amateur, like ethnobotanist, a real kind of modern shaman who knows his stuff. And so he's been able to convince me that there is, even there are shamanic ways of indigenous ways of rendering these compounds from things like cinnabar and et cetera, et cetera. And so I do see, because he provides ample evidence throughout the historical tradition, the textual tradition, that leaves room for that possibility. I would not say that I am utterly convinced, and I would not say either that it is essential to the mystery traditions. I would say it's adjunct. It can be supplementary. As I mentioned before, the right kind of person can take this 4 or 5 times in their life and then use that to catalyze growth and change, and then move on to other types of practices where this can be cultivated at will and controlled and used for specific ends. I don't think I can say much more about it other than that. But I do admit to the fact that When I was rigid and began to experiment with hallucinogens, they certainly broke me down.
I've got a whole bunch of other questions. We'll start venturing into like alchemy and stuff, but I've got a little segment that I think will make it easier to kind of just go through and give you a little bit of a litmus test. So I'm going to play like a 5-second little intro, and then I'm going to explain the rules to you. Are you ready?
Okay, yeah, good.
All right.
Hey, conspiracy buffs, I double dare you to take some PCP, the Paranormal Conspiracy Probe. On your marks, get set, and go!
Okay, the rules to this are pretty simple. I'm just going to kind of like give you a concept, and I just want to get like a 1 to 10 rating from you on how much you agree or disagree with that premise. A 5 meaning that like you're going to reserve to not have an opinion, or that you could be swayed either way, or that you don't even care about it. So, for example, if I were to ask you the validity of a physical objective homunculus, an alchemical homunculus, where you create, you spontaneously generate out of animal matter another living humanesque sort of being, on a scale from 1 to 10, how valid do you think that is possible to create?
7.
How about the concept of Bigfoot having ever existed in the world in an objective way?
I mean, I can think of it as like a 6 or a 7, but like in my heart of hearts, I don't care. So should I give it a 5? I mean,
yeah. If you don't care, then yeah, 5 is fine.
Okay, like a 5. Yeah.
How about the concept of flat Earth?
Like 2.
Okay, so you're saying there's a chance.
Look, there's always going to be a chance, because even though I have strong opinions that I've arrived at through like hard fought methods, I know enough to know that I don't know everything. So
okay, so
I'm usually wrong.
I mentally adjust your scale from 2 to 9 to be the new 1 to 10. Whatever. Like we'll do like a grading average here on this. Okay. How about the concept of hollow Earth? And I guess to be specific in that there are civilizations, almost Tarzan style, like civilizations of advanced, entities or creatures or humans under the surface of the Earth.
Well, here's my thing. I do believe that we're here not alone, but I don't think that the entities that are here with us have any definite physical body. Does that? And they could very well live inside the Earth, but I don't necessarily think it's like aliens with like a full civilization. I mean, I lived in New York City for a really long time, and there were like people down in the subways,
albino crocodiles or whatever.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe like a 4.
I think that's fair. How about a literal Atlantis at some point? And I don't mean Secret Destiny, Francis Bacon, Manly Palmer Hall, America's Atlantis. I mean, like Plato is writing about Atlantis.
Right. And I'm glad that he's the main historical reference that we have for Atlantis. I'm going to go with a 7 or 8 on this one. I do think I don't think it was America. There's also the chance, Plato constantly talks about, this is my bread and butter. Platonism is my thing. I spend most days reading Plato and teaching Plato. But the thing is, he does in his dialogues constantly say, I'm going to talk about something allegorically now. So it could be an allegory, but I have a feeling it's one of those situations where something to that effect did actually exist. So maybe an 8.
This one has a couple qualifiers. So I just want to be specific, because I'll have a follow-up that'll have even better qualifiers. So the first one is 1 to 10 that a human being has set foot on the moon in the last 100 years.
Oh man, you're outing me. You are outing me. I'm gonna plead the 5th. 5.
Okay. Similar question. That how valid was the footage that was broadcast to the mass public about the Apollo land, specifically Apollo 11, and I guess any of the subsequent ones? But how real was that particular footage? Feel free to take the 5th on this one too if you need to.
5.
Okay. I already asked you about, say, William Morgan and whether or not that was a real person. If you had to put a number rating on him being a real person, what would you put that at?
I would err on the side of him being a real person, maybe like a 6 or a 7.
Okay. So maybe similar to to Atlantis. I want to ask, are you familiar with Tartaria, the concept of Tartaria?
Yeah.
Give me a 1 to 10 on Tartaria.
Like 2.
Okay. Now I guess this might be a subset of Tartaria, but I think it's valid to point it out in its own right. This concept of global resets, or more in particular, these ideas that say the world fairs and these world expositions in the early 19th and like later 20th century, that these were sort of staged to take down existing buildings that were already here. I don't know if you've heard this particular line of thinking. So that, for example, the World's Fair in Chicago in the early 20th century, that all of those buildings were not indeed plaster of Paris, that those were real buildings, and that it was later said that it was plaster of Paris to give them a reason to knock it all down because they were hiding sort of the breadcrumbs of these Tartarian sort of previous cultures that dwarfed our own, which I've come to understand is almost like an Atlantis that was like destroyed by the new explorers.
With all that other stuff in there, I'm going to give that probably like a 4 or a 3. But I will say I do believe in global resets, but not in that context. But I do believe that some level of erasure and then fabrication of our history at various periods. Normally, I assume, or I would say that it's to my thinking that would be predicated more on astrological timing. But I don't know. I'm just not. I'm not big on this idea of like, end scene right before Indiana Jones where they put like the artifact in the massive warehouse. Holding on to this stuff. But maybe, right? Because then there's Area 51 and there's supposedly a ton of shit in there. I mean, again, a lot of hearsay, but I would say that is so hyper specific and strange for me to hear because this is the first time I'm hearing about it, that right now I'm going to give it a 3 or a 4.
Okay, and we'll move away from the 1 to 10 stuff. It's a fun segment because I've got a couple others. You opened the door to Bavarian Illuminati, and this is sort of like a guilty pleasure of mine. And so here is, we'll just shoehorn this one towards the end here. But my understanding, very rudimentary version of this, Rockefeller education system based, but that the Bavarian Illuminati essentially would not have reached the level to which we're even talking about it now, 200 years plus later, if it hadn't have been their infiltration of Freemasonry, specifically through Adolf von Knigge, the guy that went by Philo, I believe, was like his code name, and Adam Weishaupt was Spartacus, but that they basically, Adam Weishaupt starts this organization as a reactionary pendulum swing away from the Jesuit order, which he was kind of forced to grow up during this age of enlightenment, being told like, no, all this new science stuff that you find interesting, you're not allowed to think about that or talk about that. The Jesuits lose sort of their control, which you kind of mentioned previously. Adam Weishaupt comes in, and then one part of my mind understands that the original premise of the Bavarian Illuminati was so anti-Jesuit that there was almost an atheistic aspect to it, that the Bavarian Illuminati, Adam Weishaupt at the head of this, was essentially like a staunch atheist, which might be too broad of a brush to use to stroke this, but that the infiltration of Freemasonry seems counterintuitive to that. Although if it was just being used as a vehicle to bolster the support of the Bavarian Illuminati, then it makes sense. And then I guess to wrap a little bow on this, that as the Bavarian Illuminati decline, after they become aware of the authorities and the papers come out and they figure out where everyone lives, that this basically becomes reabsorbed back into Masonry again, because like from whence it came almost essentially. Is there any merit to any of that sort of like chronological lineage that I just laid out?
Well, the thing is, so obviously the Bavarian Illuminati were never officially Masonic. They were never considered a part of Masonry, which you understand. But I just want to say that for the audience, they patterned again their modes of recognition, their ritual, etc., on Freemasonic ritual. The Bavarian Illuminati infiltrated everything. They infiltrated the government, the educational institutions, Freemasonry, because it was essentially, almost like it was a communal thing, a business thing, and I kind of can see what some people say about it being a precursor to modern intelligence gathering agencies to some degree, but I don't. It was not, infiltrated. They were recruiting from Masonry, and they were joining their ranks in an attempted, but like world Freemasonry at that time was not infiltrated. In Bavaria,
right,
the regional thing, absolutely, there's a probability that to a greater or lesser degree they comprise about 50% of the membership. I'm not exactly sure on that number, but the fact that they did such a good and thorough job that they were eventually, and you think about it, and they were secularist. That was their type of illumination. Whereas you look at, Dom Joseph Pernetti and his, Illumines d'Avignon, that's a different kind of Illuminati, one that is philosophical, religio-philosophical. And whereas the Bavarian Illuminati, they were totally secular. And I would not surprise me if Adam Weishaupt was an atheist. As a matter of fact, I forget who it was, but a journalist went and visited him when he was an old man, wherever he was staying. And it's a really fascinating kind of document to read this guy's conversation with him. He seemed extremely, at that old age, very bitter, very Machiavellian. So again, there's that kind of shadow side of atheism where it's like this they wouldn't have called it that back then, but our term for it is socioeconomic Darwinism, where it's like survival of the fittest out here. I don't give a shit about highfalutin morality. And, it's all about my team wants to win. And you might think that you're doing the right thing, but it's not always the case. I would say that the wonderful comedy of this all is when Jacob Lang is struck by lightning on a horse, and that enables the authorities to find the papers of this secret society and what they were planning.
Right.
Act
Woven
of God,
into
right
his
there.
clothes, apparently.
Act of God right there. I love stuff like that. So for me, so that's a pretty interesting thing. I would say though that they were not successful at infiltrating worldwide Freemasonry. So I don't think Freemasonry ever bore the taint of the Illuminati. But I will say this, there was a time when organizations like that they prevailed in the intellectual culture of the time. So I do find that at a certain point, at this point, right, the 1700s, even in America, Freemasonry did function as a kind of quasi-intelligence gathering agency, and allowed people. That's why it became so dangerous to standing empires, is because these people could organize and take you down.
I like too that this is something that maybe doesn't get specified enough when Illuminati comes up, because usually when the term Illuminati comes up in conversation like this, it's almost assumed that it's like a global force, but we're literally talking about a microcosm, a small area of Bavaria specifically, so that when the phrase of Illuminati infiltrated Freemasonry, it's really meaning that within Bavaria, they realize that if we can get the worshipful master of a lodge and get him into the fold of this Bavarian Illuminati, then we can kind of guess that all of the other members of that lodge, even if they don't also join, they're kind of working at the behest of someone that is of our same thinking. They're like one of our compatriots. So that's a very specific but important delineation. We're not saying that Bavarian Illuminati infiltrated worldwide Masonry. It was in a very small area. And that this is where it does get murky, that after Lange gets hit by the lightning bolt, which according to legend, he's directly next to Adam Weishaupt. They're both on horses, and he's the only one that gets hit. And Adam Weishaupt's just like, whoa, and he goes and hides behind a bush somewhere, and like the authorities come and find Lange and all the different papers in his clothes. And then this is essentially the origin of that downfall. And this is where legend maybe gets born too, and that the Bavarian Illuminati realized, gigs up, they're coming after us. Let's go ahead and stop doing this Bavarian Illuminati stuff and just go back to lodge like normal sort of kids would do, like a normal respectable Mason. Well, there was another dynamic with the Masons being attracted to the Bavarian Illuminati. Correct me or fill in if I've got any of this murky, but my understanding is that there was a lodge in Bavaria that was the Lodge of Strict Observance, and that they were going through sort of a contradictive period in which some of the Masons were claiming lineage to the Templars, these Templarist Masons. And there was another group that was like, hey, this is a little bit murky. I don't want to look like an idiot. I don't want to go outside and have people making fun of me because they're like, you're not a real Templar. And I have to explain to them, I don't really believe that, but my brother believes that. So they kind of were like, look, guys, cut it out until we can actually prove direct lineage to the Templars. Stop bringing your chainmail and your swords and like your shields to lodge, because we don't want to seen as LARPers like you guys are. And that this sort of disenfranchisement, these guys that invested all their time and money into these swords and chainmail and stuff, they were like, well, I don't want to go to lodge anymore if I'm not allowed to bring my Templar outfit. And basically the Bavarian Illuminati were like, hey, if you guys love that Templar stuff, we've got the group for you. Like, you can still come and LARP with us and we won't make fun of you, and we like embrace it. I'm sort of like, like over-grandizing this a little bit. Like, I'm kind of tongue in cheek, but that's sort of the broad strokes of how I understand that they were even able to attract the Masons to begin with. Leading to a specific question here, what do you think about the lineage of the Templars to the Freemasons? Is this wishful thinking on people that just like Masons that want to be Templar, or do you think that there's any valid connections there?
Something I spent a lot of time on, especially being a quote unquote Templar, and the York Rite and everything. One of the things, I err on the side of those kind of what I would believe to be more sensible of the two types of Masons in Lodge of Strict Observance. And I would say, look, there are major markers, right? But there's no way to connect them historically. The best that we can do is say what we think happened. So I'm not going to go around and pretend, stamping my foot, that this is actual, we're the custodians of modern day Templary. We're the inheritors. There's enough there to kind of connect, not in any historical sense that is verifiable, but there's enough to raise a shadow of a doubt, or maybe like just plausibility, right? Plausible rather. I find it plausible rather than probable. That's the best way I can put it. But to connect not only the Templars and the Freemasons, but the Templars and the Rosicrucians. So there's a lot of that. Also, there's the most compelling evidence for Masonry being derivative of Templary for me is this. There is a Sufi order called the Bektashi. Okay, and these guys were practicing around the time of the Crusades. Now, there's a book called The Secrets of the Sufi Freemasons, and it goes into sort of the similarities between the Bektashi sect of Sufism and Craft Lodge. And I mean, it's down to officers, the like Dugards, the signs and all that stuff are almost identical. So if there was one actually plausible line that I think deserves actual more attention rather than this Dan Brown, Rosalind Chapel sort of thing, is that study how the Sufis interacted with the Templars, particularly the Bektashi sect. I mean, this might have been disproven by now, but for me, to my understanding, Freemasonry may have inherited a lot from the Bektashi sect of Sufism, which is not a religion the way that it was an actual order in the overarching, Sufistic sort of, mystical religion. And that is probably the best way for me to sort of connect those dots. But again, there's nothing that is this like, okay, like chains, like links, like, okay, this one goes here, this one connects this way. But there's definitely something there that gives me the idea of plausibility.
There's one other connection too between Templars and Masons that sometimes it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth to bring up. But I'm just curious, do you think that there's a reason why the work of Leo Taxil, 100 years after he admitted that it was all a big hoax, he was just trolling everyone involved, that it still gets cited in 2025 even as being some sort of like documentation of Masons being accused of doing the same thing Templars were accused of doing, like we're worshiping these statues of Baphomet and doing all sorts of like pagan sacrifices?
Do I think there's a reason it still gets cited?
I'm curious why in particular. Like, what did Leo Taxil do that his work that he admitted was a hoax to just to rile people up, that it still gets cited as research?
Look, the main thing is this: what I have learned as a Masonic historian and an independent scholar is that people are reckless. They think they know how to do research, and they don't know what they don't know. And I see it sometimes in PhD level dissertations. I don't know how to. I'll give you the best example because it's the most recent in my head. I saw a dissertation that talked about William Butler Yeats. And William Butler Yeats is a famous Irish poet, right, from the Fin de Siècle, Ireland and England, right? He was a member of the Golden Dawn. He was the first class of the Golden Dawn. I saw research, actual academic research that was under peer review that this is a PhD student, talking about comparing the poetry of William Butler Yeats to modern Golden Dawn ritual, and how this could have influenced him, and they not realizing that the ritual as we see it today in Israel Regardie's Black Book and that are in a lot of places, it didn't look like that when he was going through the Golden Dawn. And it's these kinds of blind spots that people don't even think. You're so outside the tradition. You're so far out. You're such an outsider that you don't even know what you don't know. But you persist anyway, because the thing is, it's become very accessible. We see people doing it all the time. People nowadays, we like to think of ourselves as like shrewd and smart, intelligent. We don't know how to think. We're so easily convinced by people who speak very confidently, use big words, and are telling us something that is like contrarian. Especially in America, Americans love contrarianism. That whole like gotcha moment where whoa, that doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean that it's true. It's just exotic. And most of all those problems aside, which are endemic, all those problems aside, people want to put a target on Freemasonry for multiple reasons. The first of which being, you always fear what you don't understand. And to me, I see us as a group of men, at least on the local level, right? Again, I'm not exonerating it of anything wrong, because the thing is, like I said, all institutions will be human, good and bad, at different levels. But on the local level, my experience has been nothing other than just men who get together in solidarity and fraternity and coach each other through the hardships of life. There's some things that a man can only learn from a woman, but there's some things that a man can only learn from a man, and the same for women, and as a generation of men, including myself, that were bereft of positive male role models, this is a healing event for me, and this is an incredible thing. And we do charity, we do blood drives, we do go to the Veterans Hall, drop off food and things like that, and we do give money. So there's that wholesomeness, and I think that for a lot of reasons, that is not, I'll put it this way, that is not what the movement of society wants. Strong male groups right now. And so, yes, it's, of course, there's going to be a prolonged effort to put a target on our chest. And they have, right? I mean, they murdered that guy point blank, that brother point blank, I think out of Tennessee last year. They firebombed the York or the Scottish Rite in Athens, Greece. We've had multiple bricks thrown through our windows in Asheville. So they foment this distrust, and I think that it's very alluring. It's very attractive to say, here, look, men, scapegoats. They're the source. They're the problem. Because otherwise, it's a fucking phantom that's diffuse. You can't see what is tormenting you in modern society if you don't have a group of people to blame it on. And that's not just for Freemasons. Every group has another group they're blaming their problems on, So,
Ike Baker, we could keep going and going, but I like to try and run a tight ship here. I'm going to get you out of here. I want to just invite you to talk a little bit more about this on-location field immersion that you're doing in Egypt, where you got like 16 participants. It's like a 9-day thing. Tell more about that, because that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, so we're still in registration. We've got a couple more seats left. It closes March 21st. I'm going to be taking 16 participants on a field immersive excursion through Upper and Lower Egypt. This will be on site. It's going to be 9 days, 8 nights. We have private access to almost all the temples, the ancient temples that we're stopping at. So the temple to Hathor at Dendara, the Osirian, the temple of Osiris at Abydos, the sanctuary of the goddess Sekhmet, and we even have a 3-night stay on King's Island, a private island in the middle of the Nile. We're going to be learning about the history, theory, and most importantly, the practice of what is called Greco-Egyptian theurgy. So these are techniques of using ceremonial ritual, for lack of a better term, magic, for the purposes of spiritual elevation. And catharsis, which is a kind of purification related to the elevation of the soul. And I've reconstructed these rituals from over 60 primary sources, including the Greek magical papyri, On the Mysteries by Iamblichus, On the Hieratic Art by Proclus, De Anima by Iamblichus, the Chaldean Oracles. I could keep going. I won't. We did a digital open house where I explained the itinerary, gave a few of my sources and show how I reconstructing these, and went through the price points. And that's on the Arcanum YouTube channel. Again, it's techniques of Greco-Egyptian theurgy. We are going to be heavily practical in all this, staying at wonderful retreat centers to also have one-on-one and group discussion and exercises. And it's truly going to be a life-changing event. I've curated the material so that it's not just a group thing. Particularly, each participant will be actively pursuing their own personal initiatory journey. And there's some onboarding materials. And for people that are interested, they can reach out to me to ask questions and find out more on my website. That's ikebaker.com, IKEBAKER.com. Lastly, my book is A Formless Fire, Rediscovering the Magical Traditions of the West. I go through the history, theory, and the practice of magic from antiquity to the modern day. That's out now, but I do have a new book coming out in April on Llewellyn Worldwide. That's called Etheric Magic, a complete system of elemental, celestial, and alchemical magic. And that is a complete system of the integration of Eastern energy work techniques into Western ceremonial by way of the symbol systems of Western alchemy and the Kabbalah. So that's going to be a very, very practice-oriented book, and I'm hoping that you guys will check it out. You can pre-order it now on Llewellyn, Barnes & Noble, or Books A Million.
And as you'd expect, I'll have all the links to all the things that we talked about in the comments. Ike, Brother Baker, thank you again for spending time with me, letting me ask you about Bigfoot and aliens and NASA and stuff. These are my favorite topics ever, so thank you so much. This was an awesome conversation.
I'm loving everything that you're doing. I love the challenging stuff. I love the fun stuff. I love it all. I think that you are an extremely skilled interviewer and podcast host, and I'd love to come back on anytime. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to meet and speak with you.
Likewise, I appreciate it. And until next time, go and check out the links and support Ike and everything that he's doing. So thank you guys.
Ready for a cosmic conspiracy about Stanley Kubrick, moon landings, and the CIA? Go visit nasacomic.com.
nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com, go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com. Oh, nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com, go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
Never a Straight Answer is a 40-page comic about Stanley Kubrick directing the Apollo space missions.
Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
This is the perfect read for comic, Kubrick, or conspiracy fans of all ages. For more details, visit nasacomic.com.
Paranoid. Yo. I scribble my life away, driven to write the page. Will it enlighten your brain? Give you the flight, my plane, paper the highs ablaze. Somewhat of an amazing feel when it's real to real. You will engage it. Your favorite, of course, the Lord of an arrangement. I gave you the proper results to hit the pavement. If they get emotional, hey, maybe your language, a game, how they playing it well without Lakers. Evade them, whatever the cost, they are the shapeshift. Snakes get decapitated, met is the apex. Execution of flame you out, nuclear bomb distributed at war, rather gruesome for eyes to see. Max them out, then I light my trees. Blow it off in the face, you're despising me for what though? Calculated and rather cutthroat. Paranoid American must be all the blunt smoke for real. Lord, give me a day away, vacate. They wait around to hate whatever they say. Man, it's not in the least bit. We get heavy rotate when a beat hits, so thank us, you're welcome. Fuck the niggas for real, you're welcome. They ain't never had a deal, you're welcome. Man, they lacking appeal, you're welcome. Yet they doing it still, you're welcome.